Okay, we're all set.
Bianca, right?
Yes, Bielka Melendez. You actually pronounced it very well.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nadir. I really appreciate the time that you have dedicated to us. Here, the following that we have in Somos Keto in the Dominican Republic. Just, I know that you're a cardiologist here in Webster, Texas. Okay? Just to learn a little bit of how do you start in keto and how do you start incorporating in the cardiology?
So, first of all, I'm honored to talk to you, and I'm so happy to see that you made the trip from Dominican Republic.
Yes.
And I am honored that you stopped me to talk to me.
Thank you for taking the time.
So, I am a heart doctor, an interventional cardiologist. I put stents in people, and I have done that for 29 years. And I used to be very dejected about treating them in the office. I would fix them in the heart cath lab, I would put stents in them and take care of them. But for the first 23 years that I was a cardiologist, I didn't want to see them in the office. Because everything that I did out there, I felt was not something that made a difference.
It was not curing people.
The diet, the low-fat diet was not helping. People were still gaining weight. I didn't think that medicines really had any impact. I never really truly cared for cholesterol-reducing medicines. The blood pressure medicines didn't seem to work. So out of personal experience, I came onto the low-carb diet for myself. I'm a cyclist, and I belong to a cycling team. I'm a team doctor. And right now I'm about 145, 150 pounds. But back in 2012 and 13, I was about 185 pounds. Do you use kilograms in
Pounds.
the pounds?
We
Okay,
use
so
pounds.
that'll be okay.
Yes, it will.
So I needed to lose, to stay with my cycling team while they cycle. I needed to lose about 25 pounds, and I could never do it on the standard American diet. Even if I starved myself, it would go down and it would come right back up. And that's when I got keto information, because Chris Froome is a cyclist who won Tour de France, and he did keto in about 2012-13. So I did that, and I found that when I looked into the science as to how much it made sense, and in the first 6 months, I easily lost the 30 plus pounds that I had
Wow.
without really having to struggle.
And how long did it take you?
Oh, 6 months.
6 months.
6 months, and I was 185, and I got down to 150 very easily in the first 6 months. And I didn't seem to feel like I was hungry, that I was starving myself, because basically my biochemistry changed. Changed in such a way that I didn't have the hunger signals. I didn't have the lack of satiety signals. I didn't have the cravings.
So actually you came into keto because you actually started it yourself.
It
You
was a
actually
personal
lived it.
transformation.
Yes. Some of the doctors are not willing to do that. Many
No.
doctors are not willing to do that.
Right. I was always a skeptic of chronic medical care. I didn't think that it worked. So I didn't really like to do that. But when I saw a personal transformation, I said, why should I not try it in my patients? So ever since the last 6 years, I've been promoting this lifestyle in my patients. I've seen 90-year-olds who have lost 50 to 70 pounds, who have stopped using their wheelchairs, their crutches, who have improved from not having to take so many diabetic and blood pressure medicines. So it's been a real good journey. And in very simple terms, what that nutrition involves is stopping to eat processed food, number one. If something comes in a package, you don't want to eat it.
That's one of the things that we were talking a moment ago. Because there are keto products that are supposedly clean in ingredients, but they're packed in a bag.
I
What
would
are
not
you
trust
thinking?
those, because I would go for real food. Meat, eggs, cheese, fish, shrimps, butter. Um, I'm more leaning, as I have learned over time, to become more of a carnivore, low-carb diet community rather than based on vegetables and based on nuts and stuff like that. We can get into that a little bit more, but really, a low-carb lifestyle primarily means eliminating sugar, grains, which includes bread of all kinds, even whole wheat bread, rice of all kinds, even brown rice. You would eliminate starchy fruits and vegetables, bananas, potatoes, tomatoes, and you would
We
focus.
eat a lot of beans also in the Dominican Republic.
So beans would not be good for a few reasons.
Okay.
And I think first of them would be that they are a little high in carbohydrates, and beans have a lot of anti-nutrients. So I don't know if your community has heard about lectins.
Well, it's good to
Lectins-
introduce them to that. Yeah, we.
Lectins are a certain compound in
Mhm.
beans that bind to the gut lining, and they create some degree of toxicity. So the lectins are found in all kinds of beans and nightshades and stuff like that. So if you're cooking beans, one of the most important thing you need to do is to soak them and heat them, because that reduces the lectin content. You should never try to eat cooked beans beans that have not been well cooked or not soaked. And even when you do that, I'm not sure you remove all the lectins.
And what does the lectin do?
So
You say that it ties into your gut.
it ties into the gut and creates an inflammation.
Okay.
And that inflammation can lead to leakage in the gut lining. It can cause an acute illness. And so we don't know really chronically if you are inflaming your gut, whether it would lead to long-term problems like autoimmune diseases and inflammations.
It's good that you mentioned the autoimmune disease because I have a few questions that come from that, especially Hashimoto's and hypothyroidism and rheumatoid arthritis and lupus. Why do we have these? Why are they all of a sudden increasing? What's actually autoimmune? What is that definition? What does it mean?
So an autoimmune disease is one in which the body is not able to recognize self from foreign. So we have proteins, we have structural components, and the body knows that this is our own issue and it does not attack it. On the other hand, when you have a microorganism, a bacteria or a virus that gets into your bloodstream, the body wants to get rid of that.
Excuse me, I just want to make sure that this noise is not affecting the recording.
It went down.
Oh, it went down. Okay, perfect. So let's continue. I'll edit that.
We can edit that later.
So that
So to repeat that again,
Yeah.
so the body has a capability of recognizing self from foreign.
Okay.
So our own body has protein of different kinds, various cellular elements, structures, and it does not want to damage that. On the other hand, there are bacteria and viruses that get introduced into our body all the time, and it does not want the bacteria and viruses that invade our tissue to gain a foothold. It wants to kill them. The autoimmune disease is a failure to recognize a bacteria from your own cellular components. So what promotes that? What promotes
actually causes that
what
confusion?
causes that? What
Yeah.
causes that confusion is an important point.
Yeah.
And we think in the low carb community, one of the primary reasons for that confusion is leaky gut.
Okay.
So if I were to describe to you that the lining of our intestine from which we absorb nutrients is very tight, one cell is tightly linked to the other, and it doesn't permit any foreign molecules from getting in. Like for example, when we eat protein, the stomach acid breaks the protein down. The pepsinogen in your stomach, which is an enzyme, breaks the protein into smaller molecules which are called amino acids. And the body likes to not absorb protein, but likes to absorb amino acid and build its own protein. So if you have a gut lining that is tight like that, it prevents the protein from passing through. But if, on the other hand, if you're doing things in your nutrition that disrupts the gut lining, that breaks the bond between cells, then larger molecules like protein that have not been digested get into the bloodstream. And that's what creates an inflammation, an inflammatory response, and that's what increases immunologic activity against that protein. And the body confuses and says, I cannot recognize what is self and what is foreign. And that is what causes autoimmune diseases which are associated with inflammation.
Yeah, because those bacteria are meant to be inside the gut.
Right.
They're supposed to be inside and not go out because they're good in there, but they're not good out.
Exactly.
And that's basically caused because of gluten.
So gluten could be one because it specifically affects the zonulin protein that keeps the tight junctions tight. But it is not just gluten. There are several similar molecules that are found in all kinds of plant matter, vegetables, that can do the same thing.
Okay. So you would say that all vegetables can do the same thing, or only the ones that we remove from the keto diet?
So, all of us are a little different. I may be a little different than somebody else. A person who has lupus, who has rheumatoid arthritis, perhaps is more susceptible to the effect of these vegetables on their gut lining. You are very healthy, and it's possible that your tolerance of vegetables is much higher, and those same vegetables would not create the leaky gut in you as it would create in somebody else. Now that's not the only way you would get leaky gut. As a medical community, we do several things to promote a leaky gut. And one of the most important things that I want to talk about is drugs that reduce stomach acid. So you know about Zantac, you know about PPIs, proton pump inhibitors like Prilosec, like Protonix, like Nexium. So what they do is that when you take them, it reduces stomach acid.
It's used always when you have to take antibiotics, or when you have to take also other medicines. It's also used in conjunction with other medicines, right?
It can be. It's primarily used in people who complain of acid reflux.
Okay.
So these are acid reflux medicines. You take it and your acid levels go down, so you don't feel the acid coming back into the esophagus.
Okay. And those medicines will affect and will cause the leaky gut?
Yes, and let me show you how. Because our stomach acid, one of the primary functions of that is to be an ecological barrier. An ecological barrier means that our food contains bacteria in it. So when you eat the food, we have an acid-based digestion. So the acid in our stomach kills the bacteria and reduces the bacterial load that is getting into the small intestines. Because our small intestines is supposed to be bacteria free. When you remove the stomach acid, you increase the bacteria in the stomach and in the small intestine. It's a condition called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. And that's what promotes leaky gut. So one of the ways to make the leaky gut worse is to take acid reducing drugs. One of the ways to make leaky gut worse is to take antibiotics.
Hmm.
Because antibiotics may kill your good bacteria and may promote the growth of bacteria that are not so beneficial for you. So these are subjects that we have kind of veered away from the focus on the low carb. But the primary message for low carb people is that the reason we are trying to go towards that is because about 70% of the world is insulin resistant. And if we define what insulin resistance is, what that means is that if your blood sugar is normal, let's say a normal blood sugar is about 90 milligrams per deciliter, a normal level of insulin would be about 5 to keep the sugar levels there. So you need a smaller amount of insulin to hold your sugars.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not the situation in about 50 to 70% of the world's population, because the rest of the world is following the American example. 70% of the time in the US, you have insulin resistance. Your insulin levels are higher, so you need a higher amount of insulin to hold your sugars down.
Okay.
And so the question is, why is your insulin level high? The reason it is high is because you are eating a large amount of refined carbohydrates.
And that actually causes insulin resistance because the insulin is just too high, trying to relocate the sugar in the cell.
Correct.
But the cell is blocking and it's not allowing the energy to come from the glucose.
The cell is already filled with sugar.
Already filled.
And it
It
doesn't.
can't take more.
It cannot take more.
Where does the glucose go then?
Then the glucose is either packed into the cell by a higher insulin level, or if the insulin rises and rises and rises and it still cannot pack the sugar in, you become a diabetic and your sugar levels start rising. So think back, and just don't think back about 2,000 years, but think back 10,000 years, 50,000 years. Our ancestors did not have access to carbohydrates like we do.
No.
They didn't have agriculture, so they didn't grow grains. They didn't have fruits all year long. They had fruits only in summer. And the fruits that they had were not so sugary like we have. Their fruits were tart and bitter. In addition to that, our ancestors lived very differently. They were exposed to the environment, they had to move all the time, they had to be physically active. Food was not available all the time. You bring up a good point. We didn't have a refrigerator and a supermarket. So you went through periods without food.
Mm-hmm.
So they were a lot more insulin sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And if there is one important thing that we need to point out is that the human pancreas is simply not designed to take a glucose load, a sugar load, or a carbohydrate load. Because the more carbohydrate you give it, it cannot handle it. It increases the insulin level to a certain degree, and when it can't pack the sugar in, the sugar starts rising and you become a diabetic.
And what happens if it's the contrary? What happens if we have a hypoglycemic patient in which we need to have the glucose level controlled? How does that?
So many people come to me and say, I cannot follow a low carb diet because when I do a low carb diet, I become hypoglycemic. And I don't know if that is your question. But I tell them that a person who is getting hypoglycemic episodes, the low carb is the best diet for them. Because what happens is that if you are eating a lot of carbs, in order to keep the carbs down, your insulin level goes up, and the carbs level your sugar level just doesn't go to normal. It goes to subnormal because your insulin is high, kicks in high, and drops your sugar. And when you drops your sugar like that, you start feeling hungry and irritable. On the other hand, a person who's doing a low carb diet, their insulin levels never truly go up.
Why?
Because what is the stimulus for insulin
The
secretion?
carbs.
The carbs.
Now, what about the glucose? How can we level it if we're not ingesting any glucose?
That's such a good question, Vielka. You're very smart. So, if you like, there are three macronutrients, right? There's protein, there's carbs, there is fat. Humans cannot live without fat. There are certain essential fatty acids that we have to take. We cannot live without protein because protein is absolutely needed for us to build muscle, build certain enzymes and other structural components that are needed. So you can't live without protein. But there is no essential carbohydrate. So people will be shocked to know that you can live a completely normal life by eating zero carbohydrates.
We don't need carbohydrates.
We don't need
at
carbohydrates at all. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. But first, let's look at the Inupiat Indians who live in Alaska. They have no access to carbohydrates. They eat caribou or sea lions, or they eat all kinds of different fish that are available to them, whale meat. So they are essentially not eating any carbs in their entire lifespan if they are living the indigenous way, not spoiled by Western culture in which you're now bringing in bread and sugar and donuts and French fries. So the Inupiat Indians that lived their native lifestyle live without carbohydrates. In fact, there is a book that has been written in the 1950s by a gentleman by name Swenson who went and lived with the Inupiat Indians. It's called Not by Bread Alone. It would be a good book for people to see.
Not by bread alone.
Right.
And his name again, please?
Wilmar Swenson.
Okay.
So, let me now explain to your audience as to why carbohydrates are absolutely not essential in a human diet. Because if, like for example, the brain does need carbohydrates to work. The brain needs sugar to work. But the body can convert fat. Fat has triglycerides, which is fatty acids and glycerol. It can take the glycerol from the fat and convert it to sugar. And it can take certain amino acids from protein and convert it to the sugar that it needs. In addition to that, when you're not eating carbs, the body switches from burning carbohydrates for fuel to burning fatty acids, which is found in fat as fuel directly, or the fatty acids are taken into the liver, and the liver converts that into ketone bodies. And ketone bodies are small sugar-like molecules that are derived from fat, not from carbohydrate, that our brain can use for fuel. In fact, there are many situations in which the brain functions better on ketone bodies than it functions on sugar. Like for example, you take the case of an epileptic person who's having epilepsy. High ketones makes the brain function better. It reduces the risks of epilepsy. In fact, before the drugs for epilepsy came on board, people used to treat epilepsy with ketone bodies by making people go into ketosis naturally.
And can we stay, even if we're not sick, if we don't have epilepsy and we don't need to use it as a therapy, can we stay in ketosis a limited time? Wouldn't that affect the muscles? Wouldn't that affect our joints? Will the body eat itself?
It'll actually make it better. The body will not eat itself to nothing. In other words, people will say, hey, I'm going in ketosis, I'm just going to completely disappear. That's not the case. as long as you're eating fat and protein, the body is going to find enough nutrients, and at some point you're going to get weight stable. Like for example, I've been weight stable for the last 5 years between 145 and 150 pounds.
That's the weight that your body understands is your ideal weight.
And it keeps it there
Yeah.
without much effort on a low carb, animal based diet. And I really don't have to think, hey, am I gaining weight? Am I losing weight? It just happens naturally.
It's the size that you need, your body.
It's the size that my body understands is good for me. And I do it without cravings, I do it without hunger, I do it while I'm feeling good.
You're always feeling good. There's no moments in which you get probably lightheaded or something.
So no, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend and say I'm not exposed to the stresses of life like anybody else is, because I am. I'm a physician. I have to deal with patients a lot of times. Sometimes these patients are very sick and I need to take care of them. That is stress. I have to work for long hours. Sometimes I have lack of sleep. So all of those are stressors for sure. But I think that a low carb lifestyle permits me to deal with that stress a lot better than I used to do when I was following the standard American diet.
And that will also happen to women, or this is something only that men experience?
So I think women are particularly good at doing a low carb lifestyle. There is a few differences between men and women with regards to a ketogenic diet, because in women, if you're predominantly using it for weight loss, the weight loss is not as quick. The weight loss is a little slower. There are some issues in which the way thyroid behaves. There are some hormonal issues that other speakers are much more intelligent about than I am. But yes, there's a few differences, but overall, it's also a very good lifestyle for women.
It is. It is. Well, I can say it is.
Yeah.
What about pregnancy, doctor? Do you recommend a pregnant woman to be in ketosis?
So there is no harm for a pregnant woman to be in ketosis. In fact, there are many presentations here of women who were not getting pregnant because the high carb lifestyle was causing polycystic ovarian syndrome. A high carb lifestyle increases the estrogen levels, reduces the progesterone level, causes an imbalance, reduces ovulation, causes all other kinds of issues. And many of the women who had insulin resistance were only able to get pregnant and they went on a low carb lifestyle. And there is really no data that a low carb lifestyle is actually harmful for women. But I don't think that your audience should take my experience, because my expertise is not there. They should take the expertise from several other presenters who presented in this conference about pregnancy and a low carb lifestyle.
That's very good, but your input is very good. There was a case in which a lady was breastfeeding and she had a case of ketoacidosis. Due to that case, breastfeeding and being in ketosis are not recommended. Is this something that you will also agree on?
I think I'd want to disagree on that. And I'm not sure why that lady went into ketosis, but usually, like for example, ketosis that you get on a low carb lifestyle is very different from diabetic ketoacidosis. So the levels of ketones that a person on a low carb lifestyle gets is somewhere from about 0.6 to a maximum that I would see of about 5 millimoles. In fact, 5 millimoles, to get to 5 millimoles of ketones.
Fast all day.
No, I think you would have to fast for several weeks.
And exercise.
Yes, so I would say you would get to 5 millimoles if you've been fasting for a month.
Oh wow. So it's impossible.
So the reason why our body does not go into diabetic ketoacidosis is because all of us make some basal level of insulin. When you make basal levels of insulin, it keeps the ketone body production in check. It also drives the ketones into the cells to be used as fuel. So that specific person who went into ketoacidosis could be somebody who would be an undiagnosed type 1 diabetic.
Okay.
So when they were breastfeeding, when they were following a low carb lifestyle, their body was really not making any insulin because of type 1 diabetes. And a low insulin state will increase the number of ketones to the point that it would cause acidosis. I have not seen a diabetic ketoacidosis in somebody who is normal, who has no evidence of type 1 diabetes. These may be people who had type 1 diabetes that got unmasked by a low carb lifestyle.
So this is actually your specialty, everything that has to do with cardiology, cholesterol, doctor. Why are we still talking about cholesterol? We haven't been eating any fat since 1990. Why all of a sudden, since we're eating fat now, it's such a thing to worry?
Well, I think we should talk about cholesterol, but we should talk about it very differently than how other people are doing. Because let me tell you, what are the things that cholesterol is involved in? Every cell in our body has cholesterol.
But we shouldn't have more than, what is it? Is 200 in total cholesterol that we should have? And between HDL and LDL, there are parameters that we should follow?
But I think we should dispel those parameters.
Okay, excellent.
So the reason for that is that when you're following, let me just give you an example. They took a study, they took a group of people, young people, 10 of them, and they made them fast for about 8 days. It could have been 7 to 8 days. At the beginning of the study, they measured their cholesterol, it was 110. 110. This is the LDL cholesterol, the so-called...
The bad one.
And I hesitate to call LDL the bad cholesterol because it does a lot of good things as well. So, I want to ask you, at the end of 8 days of fasting, did their LDL cholesterol go down or did it go up? But before you answer that question, would you tell me that, do you think fasting is good for human health or not?
Yes, fasting is very good for human health.
Fasting is very good for human health. It empties our fat cells, it promotes autophagy, and it's a good cleaning mechanism.
That's
right?
the word, cleaning mechanism. It removes everything that is not needed, takes it out.
And that's what autophagy is. So now I come back to my question. 7 days to 8 days of fasting in 10 people, the LDL cholesterol starts at 110. What do you think the LDL cholesterol did in these people at the end of 8 days? Go up or go down?
I would go to the completely opposite response because you're preparing me for that. I would say it would go up.
Go up. How much do you think it will go up by?
I have no idea.
So it went up from 110 to 190. It was a 70% increase.
So the body was protecting itself and it was doing it by increasing
more
the
cholesterol.
LDL.
Yes. So the question is, how did the body's cholesterol go up when you're really not eating any cholesterol?
Fasting.
Right? You're not eating cholesterol.
Where did it come from?
Right? Isn't that a good question to ask? Where did it come from? Okay, so let's try to tell your audience where it comes from. So when you are not eating anything, which is basically fasting for 7 days, how long does the body's sources of carbohydrate last? How many hours do you have carbohydrate reserves? So roughly,
if you're lucky, it'll last a day.
yeah, roughly about 12 to 16 hours at which you will run out of all carbs. After which the body starts the process of gluconeogenesis, it's making its own carbs. So when the body is making carbohydrates, it's smart enough not to burn the carbs, but to save the carbs for tissues that cannot use anything else. But it will burn fat for fuel. So everybody would agree with that, right? So the body is taking the fat and either burning the fat directly, or it's taking the fat, sending it to the liver, and the liver is converting them into ketones, and the ketones can be used as fuel, right? You would agree with that?
Yes.
Everybody agrees with that. So as the body is making ketones, the enzymatic machinery that's making ketones is the same enzymatic machinery that makes cholesterol. So this is an important point for people to understand. The body is making ketones for fuel, so the enzymatic machinery that makes ketones, a precursor of beta-hydroxybutyrate, is the same precursor that can be diverted to make cholesterol. So by design, when you're making higher amounts of ketones, you're going to make a higher amount of cholesterol in the liver. And when the liver makes a high amount of cholesterol, what is it going to do with all that cholesterol?
It'll spread it to the body.
It's going to put it out into the bloodstream as LDL, the low density lipoprotein. And that's why the LDL cholesterol goes up in somebody who follows a low carb diet. And an extreme example of a low carb diet is fasting, because in fasting you're burning fat for fuel. In a low carb diet you're doing the same thing. You're not burning carbs, but you are burning fat for fuel and making ketones, and hence you are making a higher amount of cholesterol. So you would see that anybody who is doing a low carb lifestyle very good, who is thin, who is physically active, these are the people that Dave Feldman calls them lean mass hyperresponders. By design, their LDL cholesterol would be higher.
Interesting. So it's actually not a cholesterol that is caused by eating, or at least eating fat. It is a cholesterol that the body is creating,
Right.
and it's creating it because it needs it. In a fasting state, you will be needing LDL cholesterol, so your liver will be creating it. So why is it called the bad cholesterol?
Well, I have a bias, and I can tell you why it's called the bad cholesterol. I think it's called the bad cholesterol because the drug industry makes about $40 billion selling medicines to reduce the cholesterol. That could potentially be considered a biased viewpoint. But also you got to understand that the LDL cholesterol is highly beneficial for the human body, because high levels of LDL cholesterol can reduce the risks of infections. LDL is the one molecule that supplies cholesterol to your ovaries and to your testes to make estrogens and testosterone. It provides cholesterol to your adrenal gland to convert them into the stress hormone, which is called cortisol. The LDL cholesterol is closely involved in helping repair our cells. So there are multiple beneficial effects of LDL cholesterol. The LDL cholesterol is also, the LDL molecule itself is something that carries CoQ10, which is an important part of your muscle function, because it is the engine, it's the spark plug that drives the mitochondria. When you have an engine, you cannot burn fuel without a spark plug. Similarly, the mitochondria cannot convert carbohydrates and fat and proteins to energy if they didn't have CoQ10 in it. And CoQ10 is a cholesterol byproduct, and CoQ10 is also carried in the LDL molecule. So we should think of LDL not as cholesterol, but we should think of LDL as a ship, because it's got phospholipid bilayer, it's got some identifying proteins, and the cargo of that is cholesterol and triglycerides and fat soluble vitamins and CoQ10, among other things, because that's how the body carries these molecules in the bloodstream. So you should call it as the LDL, but perhaps not as the LDL cholesterol.
Gotcha. It's very, very interesting, very enriching, doctor.
Thank you.
Your knowledge is basically very, very important. And to get this diet into, or this lifestyle as keto into the medical world is very needed. We need to really spread the word. We need to have people like you that are into the medical world, you know, trying the diet and recommending it to its patients and seeing how it's working. Right now we see a lot of doctors that don't even want to talk about it, don't even want to consider anything regarding cholesterol, regarding eating fat. It's like they're completely blocked, and they just don't want to find the root cause of the illness. They just want to continue with what they know about medications, adding more medications, and people just get more ill and continue going over to the doctor getting more pills.
I couldn't agree with you more.
So your practice is amazing, in which you can actually get to cure somebody. Is it possible to cure somebody from whatever was caused by food?
I think so. I think that food is a more powerful medicine than medicine itself. That you could definitely help people with diabetes, with a lifestyle that consists of low carb, with fasting, complemented by exercise, to improve their diabetes, to improve their high blood pressure, to improve their heart disease, in addition to making them lose weight, in addition to helping them reduce inflammation, in addition to helping them with a lot of inflammatory diseases that we started out with naming, the rheumatoid arthritis and the lupus and things like that.
Yeah.
So no, absolutely. And I'm proud of you that you have come all the way to the US to a conference like this.
Yes, I'm very excited. I love what I've learned already, and your intervention is amazing.
And you're learning and you're taking it back to your community and you're spreading the message. So your work is very important. And if there is anything that I can do to contribute and help with that, I would be honored.
Thank you so much, doctor. It is my honor to have this information that you just provided, and to have this video with you. I'm going to actually be translating to Spanish, so we can have even more audience understand this interview.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Really, really appreciate to have that confirmation from a person like you. It's very important to have, because there are a lot of questions and a lot of doctors causing those questions to arise. And people start to get skeptic because of hearing the same thing since they were little, since they were an adolescent. They were hearing cholesterol, fat. You would get fat if you eat fat. Oh no, then you would get sick if you eat fit. And then they started changing things, and people just get confused, because where do you go when you have an emergency? You go over to the doctor. The doctor is the one that saves your life. And if that person is telling you that you're going to be having issues if you do something, you know, everybody's going to trust what the doctor says. So having you here in KetoCon is amazing. Thank you for sharing your knowledge. Thank you for, after going through a whole week of patients, you come a Sunday and to share the knowledge and to continue spreading the word. It is something very admirable.
Thank you. Do send me the video link once you put it up.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Vilka.
I'll make sure that this is safe